Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. A teacher's car sits at a commuter lot. Her seat at school stays empty. 5 months later, one sheet of paper ends the search. In cities like Portage, Michigan, crimes like this don't just make headlines, they pull at the seams of a quiet community. Day zero is a Thursday evening in mid-May 2017. Teresa Joan Lockhart, 44, a Spanish teacher known for reliability and clean lesson plans, finishes her day and drops out of view. Over the next 48 hours, day plus one and day plus two, normal touch points go dark. She doesn't answer colleagues, doesn't prep for classes, doesn't send a weekend note. By day plus two, her co-workers do what reliable co-workers do in the United States when a colleague vanishes without explanation. They contact authorities. The missing person file opens. Officers check the Portage residence. It reads ordinary. There is no publicly established violent scene, no cleanup claim, nothing that qualifies the location as a primary homicide scene. That absence is recorded as an absence, not filled with theory. The first concrete lead comes from a few miles away. Teresa's vehicle is located at a park and ride near the US 131 Center Avenue corridor by Angling Road. Lots like that serve carpools and quick transfers. They also give a person or a second party a place to leave a car without drawing attention. A parked car can be origin, destination, or staging. It refuses to say which. Intake work starts where it should, verifiable routine. At Schoolcraft High, attendance logs and calendars confirm she missed work without notice. Email and phone activity show silence after day zero. Neighbors recall a regular week, the dog, the porch light timers, the cadence of a home that looks lived in. Colleagues describe her end-of-day rhythm: classroom, gym, then home. Detectives conduct a neighborhood canvass and request available surveillance near the lot and along common approach roads. Where video exists, it is logged and time-stamped, not dramatized. There is no 911 call, no doorbell footage capturing a confrontation, no single frame that explains the gap. The lack of noise becomes its own data point. Geography is narrowed, but not solved. The working sequence reads: Portage residence, park and ride, vehicle, unknown. The distance is small, but operationally important. If she parked the car, the question is why there? If someone else parked it, the questions become who, when, and how they arrived or departed. In an interchange corridor, the safest early map is not a line but a cluster of rings, concentric distances from the lot with travel times attached. That keeps the search honest and prevents anchoring on a narrative that the evidence hasn't earned. The case posture is straightforward: missing adult with potential foul play. Patrol handles welfare checks and scene documentation. The investigations unit builds a relative time board to discipline the story to facts. Day zero anchors the last verified presence. Day plus one is measured by what should appear and doesn't. No staff emails, no weekend planning messages, no calls returned. Day plus two is the employer report. That board exists to keep assumption out and sequence in. It also identifies what can move the case: people, devices, and the vehicle corridor. Triage decisions follow policy. Because there is no publicly supported violent scene at the residence, investigators do not upgrade the house into something the record cannot sustain. Resources are pushed toward the variables with the highest chance of producing a lead. One team returns to the commuter lot for secondary observations, looking for tire impressions, transfer trash, or time-consistent witnesses who use the same rows each day. Another team formalizes interviews at the school to tighten the last normal contact and pin down any recent stressors or schedule changes. A third moves toward digital records, calls, voicemail pings, email metadata, knowing that in 2017, what you can get fast is often limited to carrier logs and device activity windows. The voice of the file stays clinical. The data aligned too cleanly, an investigator would say later. Sometimes that was the problem. Clean can be camouflage. An empty lot with a car placed precisely. A house that looks exactly like a quiet house on a Friday. The countermeasure is the same in every disciplined case. Fix what is verified, test every gap with something you can check, and refuse to let speculation do the work of evidence. By the end of the intake phase, the through line is tight. Teresa, 44, educator, dependable routine. Car at a commuter lot near US 131 and Center. No public evidence of a violent scene at home. a timeline written in relative markers, not guesswork. The next step is a pattern of life reconstruction designed to expose breakpoints, what she always did that didn't happen, who always heard from her and didn't, which systems she always touched that now show nothing. If the case is going to bend toward an answer, it will bend there first. The intake file fixes the first edges: a dependable teacher, a silent phone, a car at a commuter lot near US 131 and Center. The next task is mechanical. Rebuild Teresa Joan Lockhart's normal week and mark precisely where it stops. This is not theory. It is calendars, attendance records, email metadata, gym or community activity where available, and conversations with the people who can confirm how her Thursdays usually looked. In towns like Portage, routine is a kind of fingerprint. When it breaks, the break itself becomes evidence. Investigators start at the school. Secretaries, department leads, and colleagues confirm her pattern: early arrival, class prep, predictable end-of-day wrap-ups. The week of day 0 shows nothing out of character until the evening she disappears from view. There are no documented lesson plan updates after that point, no scheduling notes for the next instructional day, and no replies to messages that ordinarily get a quick acknowledgement. Those silences are logged as time brackets, not story beats. They move outward to the immediate neighborhood. Neighbors describe an ordinary week: lights set on timers, a dog walked at consistent hours, no reported disturbance that triggers a 911 call. Patrol records from the days surrounding day 0 are reviewed to confirm that absence. Door-to-door contact sheets are dated and signed. The house remains what the intake said it was: a residence with no publicly established violent scene. The file does not upgrade it into something it isn't. Attention shifts to the commuter lot where her vehicle is found. Regular users who park in the same rows before work are asked about unusual activity, unfamiliar cars lingering, or tow-away events. Where a business or municipal camera might cover an approach lane or lot entrance, retrieval requests are made and logged by time window. The objective isn't to narrate, it is to determine whether the car's presence can be pinned to a window tight enough to matter. A commuter lot can be origin, destination, or staging. Until timestamps narrow it, it is simply a location. Pattern of life requires hard anchors, so the team compiles living regularities that don't depend on speculation. Pay period routines and school calendar checkpoints show she was expected in class immediately after day 0. Colleagues who typically message her for materials or coordination provide exact dates and times of the last normal contacts. Voicemail checks and email logins, where available through legal process, are used only to set windows, not to imply movements the data cannot support. In 2017, that distinction matters. What carriers can produce quickly is often limited to call and access records, not precise mapping. A small discovery comes from the shape of the silence itself. Teresa's known patterns do not taper, they stop. There is no trickle of late-night messages that could suggest a voluntary break. There is no sequence of "I need time" communications that would move the case into a different lane. Instead, there is the clean edge of a routine that ends after day 0. The data align too cleanly, an investigator notes. Sometimes that was the problem. Clean edges can hide interference, and the only way to test that is to compare the silence against other people's clocks. Witness schedules, store opening times, traffic peaks on the access roads near the lot. With the pattern sketched, the case posture tightens. The board now reads: day 0 evening, last verified presence. Day +1, no school activity, no confirmed communications. Day +2, employer report, vehicle at the lot within a short drive of the residence. None of those points on their own prove a homicide, but together they justify expanding canvas radii and prioritizing digital requests that might locate a critical window. The absence of a public violence scene at the residence remains constant. The Allegan State Game Area is not part of the file yet because there is no lead to take investigators there. To keep the narrative coherent for court and for the community that's watching, supervisors enforce a rule common to strong crime investigations. Each new step must either narrow time or narrow space. Pattern of life has narrowed time. The next logical move is to test space. What the phones and carrier records can and cannot say about movements around day 0 without promising GPS-level precision that the data will not support. There is a human dimension here that does not require embellishment. A school waits for updates that do not come. A colleague who always gets a quick reply sees their message sit unread. Families in small cities learn to measure risk by deviation. When a person who keeps every promise to students simply does not show, the absence changes how people think about ordinary places like a commuter lot. The case reflects that reality without exploiting it. The intake work and pattern of life reconstruction set a clean edge. Day 0 is a Thursday evening in mid-May 2017. By day +2, a missing person report is filed. The vehicle is documented at a commuter lot near US 131 and Center Avenue. To move beyond speculation, investigators turn to what can narrow time and space without inventing a map the data cannot support: carrier records, voicemail activity, and device behavior. In a real crime file, this is where guesswork ends and logs begin. Timeline: relative. Requests go out quickly after the employer report. Preserved call detail records, CDRs, voicemail server logs, and any available account metadata from the days bracketing day 0 through day +2. The team builds a clock that only includes what can be verified. There is no promise of GPS traces. In 2017, the fast lane is still towers, sectors, and timestamps. Scene: nothing changes at the Portage residence. It remains a location of interest with no publicly established violent scene. The commuter lot remains a documented vehicle location, not proof of origin or destination. Digital work will not upgrade either place into a homicide scene. It will only reveal where signals did or didn't exist. Evidence: carriers return standard CDRs, dialed numbers, received calls, durations, and tower connections where available. The pattern that matters is not chatter but silence, gaps where routine users usually leave a trail. Investigators chart Teresa's known phone activity before day 0 to create a baseline: typical check-ins, message rhythms, and call windows. After day 0, her account shows an abrupt stop consistent with the pattern of life findings from the school and colleagues. That portion of the board is now double-sourced. Human witnesses and machine logs agree. A second set of subpoenas covers the spouse's device and household accounts within the lawful scope of the investigation. Early in the review, analysts note a key constraint: the spouse's phone is off during critical windows. This is documented because it narrows the window, not because it proves motive or mechanism. The data aligned too cleanly, one investigator writes in the margins. Sometimes that was the problem. A device that powered down eliminates sector hopping that could otherwise show directionality from the residence or the commuter lot. Without app-level telemetry or continuous pings, the best the team can do is frame when a phone stopped talking to the network and when it came back. Geography. With towers mapped, analysts color-code sectors that typically serve the residential street, the approaches to the lot, and main feeders along Stadium Drive and Center Avenue. There is no tower sequence that draws a neat line toward rural Allegan. The file does not claim one. Instead, digital product tightens a different axis. It shows the absence of movement data where movement would normally appear. In a metro like Portage, that negative space matters. It tells investigators where not to pretend they have a trail. Because voicemail behavior can act like a weak heartbeat in a silent dataset, the team checks server logs for post-day 0 access, failed attempts, message retrievals, or new out-of-office recordings. There are none with probative timestamps. Email headers, where obtainable, also show no login after day 0. Those negative results carry weight because they align with what the school already documented. No grading notes, no next-day planning, no "I'll be late" messages, clean stop, again. Digital work also touches the commuter lot in a different way. Detectives canvass for recurring badge swipes at nearby workplaces and transit facilities that might place witnesses on a predictable schedule, then compare those witness schedules to the time window when Teresa's vehicle was first seen stationary. It is a simple idea. If the same commuters pass the same row at roughly the same time each morning, their observations can anchor a last known appearance for the vehicle even when camera coverage is incomplete. That converts a fuzzy placement into a tighter bracket without inflating what electronic records can actually say. Under supervision, analysts test a narrow question. Are there any devices that regularly pair with Teresa's phone, home Wi-Fi, a classroom network, a smartwatch that tried to connect after day zero? Logs show nothing that changes the narrative. That result is useful precisely because it does not contradict earlier findings. It hardens the sequence instead of complicating it. With the carrier responses and local logs in hand, the team formalizes the working board. Day zero evening, last verified presence. Immediate post day zero, no email, no voicemail, no access to school systems. Day +1, no resumption. Day +2, employer report. Vehicle documented at the commuter lot within a few miles of the residence. No tower-based travel signature pointing away. The spouse's device activity is noted for its off window. It limits what telephony can provide and forces the investigation toward parallel lanes, behavioral interviews, unrelated legal contacts, and controlled surveillance under court authority. None of that reclassifies the residence as a violent scene, and none of it suggests a second story running in a different place. The arc remains single and tight. There is a human reality to state plainly. In missing adult cases, families want the phone to tell a story fast. Often it won't. What helps is not a miracle ping, but disciplined comparison. What the device did every Thursday versus what it did on this one. That comparison is what allows investigators to testify with confidence later. What was routine, what stopped, and when. In towns like Portage, where people know each other's rhythms, that clarity matters to more than a case file. It matters to how a community understands risk in ordinary places. The operational effect of this phase is concrete. Digital forensics narrowed time to a verifiable stop and denied the investigation the luxury of a speculative route. That forces the next move to be deliberate. Increase lawful pressure where compliance is thin and track conduct that, while not charged as homicide, can be used to widen observation and reduce opportunity for spoliation. It is a methodical pivot, not a guess. With time narrowed by logs and space still undefined, investigators shift to a control strategy that's common in difficult crime files. Manage the person closest to the missing adult, document compliance, and use lawful pressure to reduce the chance of evidence loss. It is not about declaring guilt. It is about preserving the record while the search continues. In the weeks after day +2, scheduled interviews are offered, counsel is noted, and cooperation is inconsistent. That posture doesn't close a case, but it does change how a case is supervised. By early summer 2017, Portage officers and prosecutors begin working parallel levers that are legal and targeted. Arrests on unrelated municipal and misdemeanor counts, bond conditions that restrict alcohol, movement, and contact, and, where ordered, electronic monitoring. Each step is documented with the same care as a forensic test. When a bond term is set, there's a signed order. When a tether is applied, there are compliance logs. When a violation occurs, it isn't rhetoric. It's a time-stamped entry that can be read aloud in court. One arrest involves damage to neighborhood utility lines. Behavior that has nothing to do with Teresa's disappearance, but does go to risk and judgment. Another booking flows from a supervision term, a no-alcohol condition that can be violated even when numbers aren't high enough for a criminal charge. A later contact includes the surrender of a passport after an appearance before a judge and the discovery of cash inconsistent with a stay-put narrative. None of these actions prove a homicide, and the file does not claim they do. What they prove is that the court now has leverage to keep a person local, visible, and subject to checks. Compliance is data. Through this phase, the residence remains exactly what it was in the intake. A house without a publicly established violent scene. That doesn't change just because unrelated charges exist. The commuter lot remains a documented vehicle location. Digital forensics have not produced a route away from it. Supervisors keep that language stable in every briefing to avoid contaminating the case with overreach. The emphasis is on structured observation. Check-ins are scheduled at known times. Movement after curfew is tested against monitoring records. Contacts with potential witnesses are tracked for consistency across interviews. Each control point has a narrow purpose, narrow opportunity, narrow risk. Investigators also use this window to resample the human terrain around the missing person report. Prior statements are revisited under the pressure of fixed timelines. Inconsistencies that didn't matter in May matter in July. If a person said they were home, They're asked again, with the call records and employment logs open. If a person says they didn't drive a certain corridor, they're asked to account for fuel purchases and recurring routines. None of this creates a new scene. It strengthens the chain of what can be proved about the days after day zero, while the search radius is recalculated by analysts. Defense attorneys sometimes argue that these controls look like punishment without a charge. Investigators don't get into that debate. Their task is procedural. Keep the person of interest within reach of the court, make non-compliance expensive, protect potential witnesses from pressure, and above all, preserve options. The longer a missing person file runs without a body, the more important it is to have crisp documentation of where a central figure was permitted to go, when they were supposed to be home, and what they were ordered not to do. There is a human cost you can hear when you talk to a principal at a small American high school. Summer planning slides by without the teacher who used to circle test dates on a whiteboard. The question that returns, quietly, is the same one on the detective's board. If routine stopped cleanly, where did it stop? Controls do not answer that. They only hold the space open long enough for the answer to surface. By late summer 2017, the file has gained something that doesn't show up on a lab bench: stability. The person of interest is under court authority. Movements are curtailed. Violations are documented. The neighborhood understands that calling police about suspicious behavior is not an overreaction. It is civic hygiene. With controls in place, the investigative center of gravity can shift again, this time from people back to places. If telephony won't draw a line, mapping will. Terrain analyses, access roads, and target areas that can be searched hard without wasting days on the wrong grid. With the person of interest under court supervision and digital work confirming a clean stop in activity after day zero, the file pivots to land. The mandate is simple and unforgiving. If telephony won't draw a route, geography must. That means building a search plan that narrows space with the same discipline used to narrow time, without inventing a destination the evidence hasn't earned. Late summer into early fall 2017, supervisors formalize a terrain analysis around Portage. The residence and the commuter lot remain what the record says they are: documented locations, not homicide scenes. The plan avoids speculation by using standard distance decay logic. Most concealment sites cluster within a practical driving radius from an anchor location, along familiar access roads, and near places where a vehicle can park briefly without attention. Analysts convert that into ground truth: drive times from the home and lot, two-lane road density, tree cover, public-private land boundaries, and the kind of shoulder where a car can pull off for minutes rather than hours. The commuter lot is the first reference point. From there, map layers identify corridors with low lighting, minimal passive surveillance, and fast re-entry to main arteries like US 131. Waterways and ravines are flagged not because water implies a specific method, but because they complicate detection. Parks and game areas are marked for access control and seasonal use. Private farmland is noted as restricted unless owners consent. Permission charts are created to prevent well-meaning trespass that could contaminate ground later needed for evidence. Nothing about this declares a new scene. It is simply a ranked list of places where a person could leave a body unseen. This is where Allegan State Game Area first appears in the planning, not as a target, but as one of several large forested tracts inside a practical drive. The logic is mechanical: miles of cover, multiple gravel pull-offs, two-lane approaches that shed traffic fast. Valley Township's grid includes 122nd Avenue, a road type that fits the criteria, but the plan is careful. Without a queue that places Teresa beyond Portage, Allegan remains a candidate zone among others. The file records why it qualifies. It does not assert that anyone went there. Search tactics are sized to what the map can support. Aerial sweeps are useful only when vegetation allows. By late summer, canopy density reduces value. K9 deployments are scheduled where wind and heat won't erase scent in minutes. On foot, teams prioritize edges, ditch lines, trailheads, and parking cuts where a driver could stop momentarily without a neighbor hearing a door slam at midnight. Every assignment is written with a start time, end time, grid reference, and the names of who walked it. That discipline is not red tape. It is what allows the department to face a family and say truthfully what has and hasn't been searched. Community energy is high, and that requires management. Uncoordinated volunteers can trample a site before anyone knows it's a site. The department channels help into controlled areas, posting a phone line for tips, pairing trained volunteers with sworn personnel, and declining requests to enter private woods without owner consent. It isn't cold, it's careful. In American missing person cases, dignity is part of the evidence chain. The map room also cross-references routine with opportunity. If a person has regular ties to a corridor, work, hobbies, or property, that corridor gets weight, but only if the record can show the connection. That avoids the trap of reading biography into geography. To keep bias out, a separate team sanity checks the grids, asking whether an equally qualified zone is being ignored because it is farther or less familiar or harder to search. The answer belongs in the plan, not in memory. By early fall, the plan is ready for a push. Concentric sweeps around Portage, targeted checks along two-lane shoulders that meet the criteria, and controlled forays into larger public tracts when staffing and permissions align. It is slow, and that is the point. The alternative is to chase hunches and miss what's underfoot. The only thing the plan cannot supply is a coordinate. For that, the case still needs a lead. One sheet of paper will eventually supply it. But at this moment in the file, there is only probability. No confession, no map, no endpoint. The investigators keep walking grids that make sense on paper and in court. In towns like Portage, where people are used to seeing one another at the grocery store and at school events, the patience it takes to keep this work methodical is its own kind of courage. Day 159. Late October 2017. Portage police conduct a welfare check at the Lockhart residence and find the spouse deceased by suicide in the basement. The house is treated as a death scene for that event only. It is not redesignated as a homicide scene tied to Teresa's disappearance. Supervisors lock down the address, limit entry, and start dual tracks. A death investigation and an evidence review for the open missing person crime file. Timeline: the discovery is logged in the afternoon to early evening window. A property officer photographs items in place, then collects 2 handwritten notes and a hand-drawn map. Each item is placed in separate evidence bags, sealed and signed. The notes are read into the record with minimal handling. One explicitly accepts responsibility for a fatal assault during an argument on the evening of day 0 and asks police to find her and put her to rest. The companion map depicts a route from Portage to a rural point in Allegan County with a labeled road, 122nd Avenue in Valley Township. No additional narrative about mechanism or location of the assault is offered in the documents, and investigators do not add one. Scene: nothing in the basement converts the residence into a publicly established violent scene related to Teresa. Detectives document the suicide, complete body recovery procedures, and return to the missing person file with the new paper evidence. A search warrant addendum covers the seizure of the notes and the map, along with any packaging they arrived in. Latent print work is authorized as routine, but the probative value lies in the text and its directions, not in a contested chain of authorship. The handwriting, phrasing, and personal references are consistent with prior communications in the file. The agency records that assessment without turning it into an expert opinion on camera. Evidence: the map is translated into actionable waypoints. Analysts overlay the sketched lines on county GIS layers to resolve the intended approach and likely pull-off. The referenced road, 122nd Avenue, intersects public land within the Allegan State Game Area and includes gravel cuts where a vehicle could stop briefly. Distance from the residence is approximately 50 miles by common routes. The document also contains a short contrition paragraph, but investigators keep the focus on coordinates. A confession without a body changes very little. A confession with a map changes everything about what to search next. Geography: the planning board now shows a single testable destination inside the broader grid drawn in the prior phase. The Allegan State Game Area is promoted from candidate track to targeted search area, but only because of the hand-drawn map recovered under chain of custody. This keeps the geography chain intact and honest. Portage residence and commuter lot remain documented locations. Valley Township, Allegan, moves into the operational foreground because the paper points there. Operations: command holds the residence overnight, drafts a daylight plan, and notifies county partners. The morning evolution is set for day plus 160 with staggered arrival to reduce contamination. First perimeter, then a small lead element with the map, then grid teams with GPS logs for search accounting. Media are told only what the record can bear, that new information directs a rural search. Details are withheld until the location is secured. The language is intentional. This is a turning point, not a resolution. Human context is addressed without spectacle. A school district that has been waiting 5 months receives a courtesy update that a targeted search will occur. Nothing more. Families in small American cities understand what that means without being told. The task for law enforcement is to translate a sketch into ground truth, and to do it in a way that preserves dignity if the worst proves correct. Bridge. The next phase is controlled movement to 122nd Avenue, establishing a staging area and executing a map-guided sweep with strict documentation, start times, end times, grid identifiers, and names of each searcher on each line. If the map is accurate, recovery will follow. If it is not, the plan must still be defensible. Day plus 160, first light. A small lead element stages off 122nd Avenue in Valley Township, Allegan County. The hand-drawn map seized the previous day is converted into 2 waypoints, a specific turn and a short offset from the 2-lane road into wooded cover. Command holds a tight perimeter while the lead team walks the sketched approach, radios open, body-worn cameras rolling, grid identifiers ready for the log. This isn't a guess. It's a field test of paper instructions obtained under chain of custody in an open crime file. The turnoff matches the sketch. Gravel shoulders, pine understory, and a brief sightline break from passing traffic. A search line moves in at measured intervals, documenting start and stop times to preserve who walked what ground and when. Within a short distance, roughly 60 feet from the pavement, searchers note surface disturbance inconsistent with natural fall. The supervisor halts movement, marks the location, and escalates to a controlled excavation protocol. The area is photographed before it is touched. Only the designated team steps forward. Human remains are located. The scene is expanded to protect the approach path and to prevent crossover between search lanes and the recovery zone. Evidence markers are placed in sequence. All actions are logged. The county medical examiner is notified. Crime scene technicians begin layered documentation. Overall, mid-range and close-up images, measurements, coordinates, and a running narrative that will later anchor sworn testimony. Nothing about this discovery reclassifies the Portage residence as a homicide scene. Allegan is recorded as a recovery site, full stop. Identification procedures begin the same day and continue off-site. Personal effects, if present, are handled as property with evidentiary value and packaged separately from biological material. A recovery sheet captures item descriptions, bag numbers, seals, and custodians. The remains are transferred under seal to the medical examiner's custody with an unbroken signature chain from collection point to vehicle to facility intake. The search line's remaining segments are walked again after the removal to make sure nothing secondary sits just outside the original perimeter. Public communication is controlled. Command confirms that new information led to a targeted rural search and that human remains have been recovered in the Allegan State Game Area. No additional detail is offered about the notes or the map until those documents can be summarized without compromising the record. The language is careful because it must be. The presence of remains answers where and who will be determined by the examiner, but it does not change how the case describes scenes. The residence remains a house with no publicly established violent scene. Allegan remains a recovery site linked to directions found during a welfare check the day before. The human dimension is acknowledged without performance. Teams pause after the removal is complete. In small American communities, dignity at a recovery site matters, to families, to the public, and to jurors who may someday hear how this day unfolded. The report reflects that respect without editorializing. Operationally, the result of this day is clarity. The map was actionable. The search plan that prioritized edges, pull-offs, and approach lanes held up in the field. The next step is laboratory, not land. A forensic examination to establish identity formally and determine cause and manner of death within the limits the condition of the remains allows. That analysis belongs to the medical examiner and will be treated as the controlling fact set for what comes next. Day plus 160 into the following week. The medical examiner assumes custody under an unbroken chain from the Allegan recovery site. Intake includes external documentation, radiography, dental comparison, and sampling for DNA confirmation. Identity is established as Teresa Joan Lockhart using post-mortem-antemortem concordance. The report certifies the essentials and limits, decomposition present, no findings inconsistent with the written admission recovered the day prior. The official cause of death is strangulation. Manner is homicide. The case file aligns the lab result with the paper evidence without dramatizing it. The note describes a fatal assault during an argument on the evening of day 0. The hand-drawn map directed investigators to 122nd Avenue in Valley Township where the remains were found. That sequence, note then map then recovery, stands on its own. No new scene is declared at the Portage residence. Allegan is recorded as a recovery location only. The evidence narrative is linear and complete. Last verified alive, day 0. Employer report, day +2. Digital silence and constrained device data. Court-supervised controls. Probability-based terrain planning. Suicide with confession note and map, day +159. Targeted recovery, day +160. Medical examiner's certification of strangulation. With the offender deceased, there is no criminal trial. Prosecutors memorialize the record in a closing memorandum. Confession note and hand-drawn map recovered under chain of custody. Directed recovery corroborating the map. Medical examiner's report concluding strangulation. No contradictory physical findings. The agency notifies next of kin, coordinates release for memorial services, and closes the homicide investigation with the only legally accurate end state available. Offender deceased, case closed. As of August 15, 2025, no credible development has altered this resolution. Public communication remains narrow and factual. The department confirms identification, cause, and manner, and the sequence that led to recovery. No speculative detail is offered about mechanism beyond what the report certifies. The commuter lot remains a documented vehicle location. It does not become a homicide scene by implication. The residence remains a death scene for the spouse's suicide only. It is not upgraded post hoc. The geography chain stays intact. Portage, home commuter lot, Valley Township, Allegan State Game Area, 122nd Avenue for recovery. One investigation, one outcome. In communities like Portage, closure is a legal term but also a civic duty. The file shows what disciplined work can and cannot do. Telephony narrowed time, not space. Controls preserved the record while searches were planned. A single sheet of paper turned probability into coordinates. Science confirmed identity and cause of death. That is how this crime is resolved, without spectacle and without a second ending. I've walked you through this case with the same rule I use on every file. Honor the facts, honor the people. Teresa's empty chair reminds me that safety can start with small check-ins, a text, a knock, a call. Notice when routines break. Speak up when something feels off. As we close, what did this story teach you about community and accountability? Where are you watching from and why did you click? If this resonated or if it didn't, tell me below. And if you value careful, human true crime reporting, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next.